All right, guys, today we're gonna be talking about decanting wine. I've got a blender here to see if that works, and I've got a couple decanters, but first, we gotta go get some wine. Let's rock and roll. All right, we've got a bunch of the wine. I'm gonna need a table. We got the table. Now, there's really only two reasons that you would decant a bottle of wine. One is for the enjoyment of the wine, to make some of the floral notes come out so that the wine is more approachable, more easy drinking, more enjoyable. The other reason is a little bit more boring and a little more simple, and that's if there's sediment in the wine. But the first thing we're gonna talk about is reason number one, and that typically has to do with the tannins, which is one of the four things that make up the structure of the wine: acidity, sweetness, alcohol, and tannin. Tannins belong to a much larger group of organic compounds called polyphenols. And these occur abundantly in nature. They can show up in the bark of trees, they can show up in leaves, and they can also show up in grapes. And now, not to go too far in the chemistry route, but a typical polyphenol is a smaller compound, and a tannin is a much larger polyphenol. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now, these tannins right here, this is what we find in the wine. And these tannins here come from the grape skins, the seeds, and the stems. And depending on the winemaking process, you can have more or less tannin that ends up in the wine. If this is a bunch of grape juice here that's been pressed from the wine, and these are the tannins that's coming off of the skin and seeds and stems of the wine when they press the juice out, the more time that all of these spend together, the more tannic the wine will end up being. And the key to decanting is the combination of the tannins plus monomeric anthocyanins. Because the tannins are larger than your typical polyphenol, they have a unique ability to combine with other compounds in the wine, like your monomeric anthocyanins. I said that pretty good. And your monomeric anthocyanins act as a cap on the tannins, closing them off, so to speak. That's my best job at a baseball cap. Chemistry. Now, the reason this is relevant to decanting is because in the winemaking process, depending on the level of oxygen that's allowed to be with the juice, these caps either do a better job of capping the tannins or not capping the tannins. If you've got less oxygen, the cap stays on. If you've got more oxygen, the cap goes off. Now, because tannins have this unique ability to combine with other compounds, they also are really effective at precipitating proteins, and proteins are in your saliva. That's why when you drink a bottle of wine that is very tannic, your mouth tends to have a drying sensation that can be extremely astringent. But the longer that this cap stays off of the tannins, the more oxygen that the wine gets, the bigger and bigger the tannin compound can become. And a bigger tannin compound makes the tannins less astringent, more soft, so to speak. And that, folks, is why we put the wine in something like this called a decanter. It's so we can allow the wine to touch more oxygen, making those tannins less astringent and softer, and also not so overpowering that you can't smell and taste a lot of the floral and fruit notes in the wine because the tannins are just overpowering and tackling your tongue. They're a little softer, so everything has a chance to shine. Now, exactly how much oxygen does your wine need? That stands for oxygen, not the other oxy. Let's say you've got more oxygen, you've got less oxygen, and a range in the middle. A full-bodied wine is gonna require more oxygen A light-bodied wine is gonna require less oxygen, and your medium-bodied wines are gonna be somewhere in the middle. I look like an arts and crafts student over here. Now, the body of a wine is related to its structure. That's the tannin, acidity, sweetness, and alcohol. But two of those, tannin and alcohol, typically make up the body of the wine, referring to whether it's full-bodied, medium-bodied, or light-bodied. And certain wines tend to be either more full-bodied or more light-bodied. Like this right here, Bordeaux blend. This is typically gonna be a more full-bodied wine. This California Cabernet Sauvignon is gonna be typically a more full-bodied wine. And this California Zinfandel is gonna be typically a more medium-bodied wine. And this Oregon Pinot Noir is gonna be typically a lighter-bodied wine. You can see here, we've got the time ranging from typical 0 to 2 hour mark. And then we've got the light-bodied, medium-bodied, and full-bodied wines. Full-body wines can sometimes decant up to 2 hours, typically 1 hour to 2 hours. Medium-bodied wines can decant somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes, typically. And light-bodied wines typically either don't need to decant or can decant up to 30 minutes. Now, guys, this is just a range. Not every wine is created the same as every other wine out there, and grape varieties tend to change depending on the climate that they're in and where they're grown. So it can depend completely on the bottle that you're drinking. This is just a rough estimate. Now, this Pinot Noir that I grabbed from the store is a 2019 vintage, which means it's a really young wine given that it's just turned 2022. Typically, younger wines can need decanting a little more than older wines because the tannins haven't had a lot of oxygen over time to be able to grow and soften. Right at the top of this wine here, there's a cork. And this cork has little tiny pores in it that allow just the tiniest amount of oxygen to get into the bottle of wine as the wine is sitting over time, which allows the wine to continue to develop. And wines that are built to age typically develop really well over time. The tannins soften, everything balances out really nicely. That's why some of the most expensive bottles you can find typically are older vintages. People have been drinking them over time and they might taste fantastic. People want them and they're in high demand. That being said, because it's a younger wine that we've got here, we're gonna use a handy dandy decanter and talk about how we decant this wine. We're gonna just grab the wine and grab a corkscrew. I gotta get a wine opener. Should have remembered that. Okay, we got the wine opener, and I already took the foil off the top, so we're just gonna go right in and take this cork out of the wine bottle. There we go. This is my favorite part of the entire video. Oh, let's pop that cork right out. Now, when we're decanting the wine, because we want the wine to soften up, this isn't necessarily for the second reason we would decant, which is because there might be some sediment in the bottom of the bottle. We're gonna talk about that in a second. But if you just want the wine to soften up, let those tannins grow so that they are a little bit more soft on your palate, then you just take your decanter, you take your bottle of wine, and you pour it right into the decanter, and you can just pour it aggressively. And once you've got the wine in the decanter, you're just gonna let it sit. And over time, a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. This is the Pinot Noir, so it'll probably be a little bit shorter. That wine is gonna slowly develop. Now, this isn't the same as the wine aging in the bottle because this is an absurd amount of oxygen. There is so much oxygen in this decanter right now touching the wine. Those tannins are aggressively growing. They don't quite have the soft growth that they would experience in the bottle, the delicate growth that would allow everything to develop really nicely. But it's gonna get the job done, and it's going to develop to the perfect drinking style of wine, perfect drinking type, perfect. It's gonna help to balance everything out so it tastes better. And once the wine's been sitting for a little bit, you're gonna grab yourself a glass. And all you've gotta do at that point is simply pour the wine from the decanter into your glass. And with just a little bit of time waiting for the premium glass of wine, you're gonna have it right on hand. It's actually delicious. But too much oxygen is bad. That's why I brought this bad boy right here. What's gonna happen if we hyper decant a bottle of wine? Toss a little wine in the top there. Seems like a lot of wine to waste. Now we're gonna blend this up and absolutely pulverize it with oxygen. Looks like a smoothie. Ooh, it smells sour, like really sour. It's not completely terrible. You can definitely buy wine that tastes like this, that you don't pulverize with oxygen. That said, it tastes bland. It completely destroyed the structure of the wine. That's so unfortunate. Now there is the second reason why you decant wine, and that is because of the sediment in the wine. To give an example, I've got a water bottle here that is full of coffee grounds. And over time, some of the tannins in the wine can get really big and actually drop out of the liquid. Something similar can also happen early on, right after wine is made, if some of the dead yeast falls to the bottom of the bottle. Now, if the wine bottle is shaken up, you could see something like this around the edges, where some of the coffee beans, or grounds, I should say, in the wine's case, it would be the sediment, is sitting around the bottle. You'd want to wait for that sediment to fall to the very bottom of the bottle, which you could see by either flashing a light underneath or lighting a candle underneath is the traditional way to do it if you want to be really fancy. Then, instead of chucking the wine into the decanter, you're going to carefully pour the wine into the decanter. And with a light underneath, you're going to be able to see the sediment slowly go from the very bottom edge of the bottle right to the lip of the bottle here. And you're gonna pour just enough wine so that the sediment stays there and doesn't come out, so you can get as much of the wine out into the decanter as possible while leaving virtually all of the sediment in the bottle. That way, when you're pouring glasses around the table, you're not pouring a bunch of sediment into everybody's glass. But most importantly, at the end of the day, drink the wine how you really prefer to drink it. If you like to taste it with those astringent tannins, or you don't like to decant it at all, drink it that way. All that matters is you get a glass of wine that you're gonna enjoy, and it hasn't been pulverized to oblivion like the other one.